Hi, I'm Mimi Chan. Welcome to Culture Chat. Thanks for joining the conversation.
Today I chat with photographer and documentary filmmaker Jonathan Marks. Over the years, Jonathan's journeys throughout the world has solidified his interest in photography and filmmaking. In particular, his trips to Nepal and Thailand throughout his 20s taught him the influence of images and stories on worldviews. We discuss these in depth, as well as the lens through which he sees the world today. If you are a fan of Culture Chat, I would greatly appreciate if you would share and rate the podcast. And also, if you really love it, you can support with a donation for as little as $1. I will take it. To keep this podcast going, you can become a Patreon of the show on patreon.com or reach out on my website. For comments or suggestions, please email me at mimi@culturechatpodcast.com or reach out on social media at SifuMimiChan. Now, on with the show. Hello, Jonathan. Thank you so much for joining me on Culture Chat today.
Well, thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
Yes. Now, technically, I have met you in person before, but it was during a wedding. So at that time, you as a professional photographer is a little bit busy, and I was actually kind of the wedding planner, so I was a bit busy as well.
You were very much the wedding planner. You were making things happen and everything went so smoothly. It was like one of the longest days that I've ever photographed, but everything just happened and like it was amazing. So you should do that more often, maybe.
No. But that was a dear student and close friend of mine. And so we went out to Portland to support the wedding and also to do our part and bring culture to it and have fun. And so, yes, I am a bit of an event planner, but not by trade. It is just something that I end up having to do by necessity. But it was great. And as a result, I saw really gorgeous photos and I've seen more of your gorgeous work, which I'd love to actually dive into and talk about because you are not just a photographer, but you also do cinematography. Like you're kind of all in. A lot of photographers I meet, they're just like, no, I capture on still, I just do still photo, and you kind of do both. And I'm really interested to see, which came first or what the true love for you is there.
Okay, that's a really good question because I sometimes try to deconstruct or create a story of my past that makes sense. And I'm in this moment now where I'm actually kind of reframing a few things and realizing that there are more connections than I realized, because I typically would say that I started photography first. And it actually undermines the fact that back in high school, I was messing around with my friends all the time making videos. So that's really now I've just been archiving a bunch of stuff from back in the day, and I'm like hearing myself directing in this raw footage from the late 90s, and I'm like, oh, I was a director back then. So I would really say that I got started when I was in high school, late 90s, growing up in Olympia, Washington. And even before that, I had an interest in art. I always was curious about drawing and painting and didn't particularly dive into it until kind of later in high school. In college then, at Azusa Pacific University down in Southern California, I basically moved through painting, sculpture, photography, and ended my undergrad probably relying most on photography. And that just happened to coincide with a bunch of travel I was doing to Nepal and Thailand. And my camera just became the tool that I was most readily able to grab. And pretty much in that time just realized how powerful it was as a tool, and how in as much as I used to take photographs in order to paint them. That was like the reason I was doing photography. It kind of became the end result. And I was proud of the photograph for what it was, and didn't feel that need to translate it into that kind of physical fine art form via painting. And I happened to, in my early 20s, connect with a photographer in Southern California that kind of took me under his wing and taught me the business side of things, which I had not learned in undergrad. I pretty much just made art. And so when I was able to see how it could kind of fit into a practical way of making a living and combine that passion with my career, it just kind of took off from there. So to connect it back then to filmmaking, which I have been doing more and more of as time has gone on, I went to grad school in my late 20s at the Vermont College of Fine Arts. And that's where I got into documentary practices and video art, and was really kind of pushing some of those skills that I had learned in photography into kind of the time-based art form of video. And so upon completing my MFA, then all of a sudden it was like these tools of photography and filmmaking became more unified. And they came into the business. They were both a part of the art practice. And I mean, definitely even just kind of taking that art journey I'm on, and kind of all the random side trails and circling things back, that is a theme of mine, that I tend to kind of be one of these people that tries all these different things and pursues my curiosity. And then it's kind of interesting when they circle back around and kind of become a part of the story in a new way. So yeah, that's kind of my artistic journey.
Well, it's like you said, it goes full circle, but then it's like, again, just starting again. Like there's always kind of a new facet of that. I'm always interested though in the technical side, because I don't have an eye for photography at all. And I wonder, like, because when I see your photos, I feel like, wow, it's not just somebody who's gone to school and has like this technical aspect, because I feel like there's something, innate with art. Like people are creative or artistic or they're not. I feel like, yes, you can learn things, but I mean, in some ways it's like you have it or you don't. So you did go through the whole technical bit. You have all these degrees and you learned all these things. But I mean, did you feel like you had kind of that like, artistic side kind of take over from that? Like, do you feel like that was stronger? Like, had you not gone to school, would you probably still be on this path, and would you still be as talented? I mean, I know that you do learn a lot of things from the technical standpoint of the camera and all that, but I mean, as a very, very limited indie filmmaker, I did not go to film school. I didn't learn anything about that, and it was very challenging for me, but I kind of know what I want. So I'm curious, like for you, if you feel like, maybe for someone who's starting out in the industry, would you say, yeah, you have to go to school and you have to learn these things, or is it more like intuitive?
Well, I see my formal education more as a pursuit in kind of the curiosity of just wanting to learn things. And the schools I went to weren't particularly heavy on the technical side of things. Especially my grad school was very conceptual and pushed my way of thinking and my way of seeing the world. And that is probably what manifests itself in kind of what you talked about my work, that I want to be really good technically, but if it doesn't have a life within it and behind it, and the story that somebody can either see in the photo, or the photo can kind of drive the curiosity toward that story, like whatever that is, I'm as much interested in that as the technical side of things. And it's funny because I was interested in art growing up, as I said, but I didn't have an outlet for it until I got later into high school. And I had been one of those students that was just so focused on academics that I didn't always pursue the other interests that I had. And so getting to kind of later in my junior year of high school, I realized I actually have enough credits that I could graduate right now. And what do I want? What do I really want to do? And so I started taking art classes instead of like doing early dismissal or just graduating early. It was like, let me dabble in all of this. And so I almost feel like maybe that like 18 years of creative interest, like being dammed up for so long, just kind of burst forth. And even when I went to college, my first day, I was an English major. And then I called my parents after kind of going through the initial classes and seeing the syllabi. And I called my parents and said, you know what, I'm going to switch to an art major. And I just like made this swing because I realized at that moment that what I loved about literature was actually the art side of it. Mm-hmm. And so then once I got into the art world, it was a more welcome environment for resonating with things the way I wanted. So kind of that technical side, like you mentioned, is important to pursue, but I think finding one's voice and figuring out what curiosities drive us forward is actually where the work becomes more interesting. And so for me, that was really wrapped up in travel. Like, I recognize that experiencing the world, opening my eyes from this, like, middle class white male from Olympia, Washington, that like traveling to the Middle East and Europe and Nepal then became like so life-changing that I don't think it's a coincidence that lined up with kind of my technical experience with art and kind of my launch into art, that those two things kind of became hand in hand, part of my journey.
And so let's talk a little bit about your travel, because it does sound like you started traveling pretty early on. And like you said, you had your camera with you. It became your tool of choice. What kind of, were you just going on vacation, or did you have like overseas jobs, or why were you traveling?
Yeah, it goes back to one part of my life that I happened to have grown up as a pastor's kid at a Baptist church in Olympia, Washington. And so I, as a teenager, was very focused on kind of fulfilling that mission of the worldview that I grew up with. And so I did do like short-term missions trips. And as somebody who does not consider themselves a Christian currently, there are a lot of parts of my past that I kind of like, oh, I feel a little bit awkward about that having been a part of my journey.
I can absolutely relate. Go on.
But again, just what it opened up in my life in terms of travel, opening my mind, opening my eyes. It was interesting how from within that bubble I was in, things that should have been seen a certain way actually resonated differently for me in a way that opened me up beyond and out, eventually outside of. I mean, it took me a really long time to come to terms with the fact that I had changed my worldview. But that travel piece became more and more, or I should say the original reason being kind of like missions and evangelizing with that worldview, shifted in my 20s to, I think truly a passion to tell stories of different things happening around the world. One of the big things in the early 2000s that I got involved with was anti-trafficking work in Nepal. And it just became this area of interest that it began with that worldview, but it moved out of it. And I think as things were able to connect with more of like the core of who I am, then my work and my opportunities, even just kind of expanded and got more interesting from there. And so Nepal is very much wrapped up in that shift for me and that open-mindedness that I experienced.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine, because a lot of kids have this story. You go on missions, and your mission there is to spread Jesus and all this. But really, what you end up seeing is sometimes not contradictory, but it opens your eyes to new things, and it makes you question and think different things. So I think maybe the mission trips don't realize that they're actually changing people's world perspectives, but it is definitely there, because I feel like when you go to a third world country and you, like you said, you leave your very comfortable home in your suburbia and you go and see that people don't have plumbing, or they don't get food as often as everybody else does, like just the little basic necessities that we think and take it for granted is very life-changing. I mean, I can relate to that, because I did get the opportunity to travel as well. I didn't go on missions, but I was just lucky. My parents love traveling, so we went on a lot of vacations. but we went to a lot of third world countries. My father is from China, my mother is from Jamaica, and so our connection with third world countries and places of poverty are definitely deep rooted. So I find it really fascinating though, because you went there with one mission, and then it actually almost came like, completely 180 from the reason you were there. So was there any instance you can remember, like you mentioned Nepal and seeing all of the strife and the challenges there with human trafficking? There's a slew of other issues in a country like this as well. I mean, was there an instance that really kind of was the catalyst for you not just changing your worldview, but also just kind of propelling you into the direction of the type of films that you want to do and the type of photojournalism that you do?
Yeah, I think a big piece of it, I'll speak to just kind of the first doorway I went through, which was to say that while I was in Nepal, the community that I was with of the short-term missions, evangelical worldview, their view was that Nepal was, was less than, right? Like, we have the answer of Jesus and Christianity. You need it, and we are bringing it to you. And in a lot of ways, the evangelical worldview, believes that when you don't have Jesus and you are not a part of it, that you are in the grips of Satan. You are, maybe not in and of yourself evil, but that the world that you exist in, the culture, so particularly Hindu and Buddhist traditions, like, they are evil, right? Like, and I was hearing these things, but it was meeting a brick wall in my heart and in my mind that I was just like, no, that doesn't make sense to me. And so as I was getting to know people and appreciate their culture and just be fascinated by the history of Hinduism and Buddhism that is so different, of course, because of the roots of them being completely distinct from Western culture, that I was just captivated by them. And so it was that recognition of having to peel away the lens that I was looking through to orient my worldview, that matrix that says I have to see these things this way, and being able to eventually really, like, eventually just start the journey that I still am on of trying to open myself to other people's experience. And so in that, again, that resonates with a theme of my work. And I think why I really like, in the documentary mode, of being the person that gets to be curious and ask questions. And then I get to take those answers that then I've filmed and kind of weave them together and combine it with my own what I've heard, but it's really rooted in, hey, like, I want to get this material, these thoughts, these things, I want to capture these moments that you've given me, and then create a film and a documentary and tell that story out of it. So that's a big part of kind of how Nepal and world travel really did kind of become a root of my filmmaking and photography.
And you also, I read, went back to Nepal after your first experiences there, like post-earthquake, and that country seems to have really captured your heart and attention.
Yeah, I traveled to Nepal a number of times between 2000 and 2006, and that was really with kind of that earlier mindset of the missions and of that worldview that I grew up with. Even though not every trip did that, the later ones were really focused more on anti-trafficking efforts and doing documentary exploration, just kind of with different organizations that were working in that world. So even though it kind of transitioned, I would say that first set of time was really kind of characterized by that. And then, as much as I wanted to go back to Nepal as often as possible, I actually didn't go back from 2006 until 2015. And I had my flight scheduled for May 2015. And right before I was supposed to fly was when the huge earthquake happened there. And it put me in a position to say, do I need to cancel my trip? Because I don't know, what, kind of the cornerstones of just kind of like food and shelter and all of that. Is it safe? My wife was pretty nervous at the time, and so I had to take that into consideration as well. But it was really those roots in those early trips that led me to say, if I go, what can I do to help? And what can I bring to the table? Because if I have nothing to give, then I should stay home, and I should wait until it's a calmer environment. It's very rarely a calm environment, I would say, in Nepal. But I ended up deciding to go, and there was a community in kind of the greater Northwest area that was gathering materials and supplies. And I felt like, hey, I have this plane ticket. Let me do this. Let me take my cameras and be open-minded enough to see if I can use my skills and my strengths in that moment. And so that trip was very stressful and trying in a lot of ways, but I feel like it did manifest in that way that I had framed it, was just to be open-minded and open-hearted. So for instance, the supplies that I took over, I was able to hand them to people directly. And, that was a responsibility I was taking on for all those people who had donated through me. And that was really powerful to take finances that I had been given to work with Nepali people, and that those Nepali people were then in touch with the villages and knowing who needed support. And then, even just the journey of like trying to get 40 kilometers from Kathmandu to a village, like experiencing that, being a part of that, documenting that, that will be a part of me for the rest of my life. It was really, really powerful.
And, just so our listeners can kind of have an idea, a lot of them are like, where is Nepal? And it's maybe near India, or like maybe you can paint a little bit of a picture of what their daily life is like. And of course, after something like an earthquake, how devastating that would be. But like, even like you said, before the earthquake, it's not like, they're in this nice suburbia where everything is readily available. Obviously, human trafficking is a huge issue. What other issues does that country face?
Yeah, Nepal, like you mentioned, just kind of geographically, it's a landlocked country between India and China. And so politically, India and China both kind of try to exert a little bit of power over that space. It's an interesting country in the sense of being an intersection there. It's a very rugged country. The Himalayas go through there. Mount Everest, the highest elevation in the world, is there. And so from a Western experience, Nepal became very popular for outdoor adventures and trekking, hiking, mountain climbing. Some of the hardest climbs in the world are in Nepal. And so there is kind of that influence there, but it is one of the poorest countries in the world. It's really struggled to kind of advance just even recent conversations with Nepali friends here near where I live. The first thought that comes to mind is not only the rugged nature that kind of separates villages and kind of keeps kind of that momentum that can come from, the bigger cities. Kathmandu is pretty much the only big city in the country. But just the corruption in the politics is a really big problem. Even for Nepali people that live here in the States, when they go home, they're consistently kind of expressing to me just the struggles they have with seeing their families have to kind of live in that environment just because it is so corrupt. And it's frustrating when you think that like I can get ahead by paying my way forward. And so because so much of the country does exist in such poverty, that does open itself up to the trafficking, and not only human trafficking, but also organ trafficking. There are communities who, really are susceptible to somebody coming in and saying, hey, I will give you a few $100s sometimes for your kidney. And because there's not as much education, then there are people who, willingly give that up because that amount of money could be 3 years worth of their income. And so, human trafficking, organ trafficking, there's still issues even with the cultural and religious rules around menstruation, and they have an issue that they've been working on now for a while. There's some really cool people who are doing work to educate in the villages about safe menstruation practices, and then be able to so let me rewind real quick to say that what religiously and culturally has been kind of the norm, is that during menstruation, women would need to go live in a hut that's outside of the house. And that opens her up to like a number of dangers, not only like cold weather, but there's also, there's been cases where people have gotten a snake bite and they've died because they were in that hut in an unsafe environment. They're also open just to the community around them, and so it's not uncommon to experience rape and abuse. And so that is just another layer to what is difficult about Nepal. But I just, the more I've gone there, and especially in recent years, as I've shed aside kind of my original reasons for going, I've just met so many cool activists and artists and people who really are changing the way that the community treats all of these different issues. And I love just being able to experience that for like person to person, like not going with an agenda. And it's been really cool that my passion for that country has like actually only kind of complexified in more ways. So
yeah, and it definitely shows. I'm looking at some photos here on your site, and when people travel anywhere, you see typical travel photos, and they look like this church or this building or whatever. And I see a lot of what you capture is a lot of like human emotion, a lot of what's going on. And when you go to pick up the camera and stop the shot, like what kind of is that motivating factor for you? Because you see things from literally through a different lens, but you see things a lot differently, not just because of your experiences, but what makes that moment very capturable?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think of photography and even kind of collecting footage as a sketching process. So it's not too dissimilar from me just opening up my sketchbook with a blank page and beginning to move my pencil. So I'm one of those people that my creativity it comes out of action and experience. And so when I'm in Nepal, or really this applies to almost every project I do, but speaking of Nepal, I put myself in an experience to connect with people who are doing something that I think is important. And then through that, I am just kind of, there's the part of me that's kind of sketching, that's looking for things, that's curious if I do this, if I stand here, where is the lighting, and just kind of playing, right? But then there's the other kind of layer to it that is asking what is beneath the surface, right? Like photography is the reflection of light off the surface of objects, and that light is coming into my camera, and then that's what creates the image. So it's very surface. But I am interested in what is beneath that and what is happening, what are people feeling, and in that, I think what I'm seeking is a single image or a video clip that then kind of allows those two things to exist in the same space. And I think that's just what's so hard about it. And I think that difficulty inspires me as well. But that is what's so hard about it, is just to like not stop at, oh, that looks pretty. And I take pretty pictures. Like I'm not against that, but I just don't want to stop there.
Right. That makes sense. I mean, and you, of course, to probably not just pay the bills, I'm sure you enjoy wedding photography and all these other things, but back home you have to also, I guess, support yourself through photography. So, but is that something that you really like love and enjoy, is the wedding photography? Because I mean, that's of course how I met you, but I'm sure traveling is very fulfilling, but you can't just like go and travel the world and take photos for a living. And you do have a wife, like you said, so I'm sure that's not on the agenda for every day. But how does that translate over to when you do like quote unquote commercial photography or advertising campaigns as you've done?
Yeah. So I do have a wife and kids, and I need to pay some bills. And I love that my wife collaborates with me in that effort, because being self-employed is always a roller coaster, but things work out if you work hard and push. And so I appreciate her collaboration in that, because her support means a ton to me. And back to the question specifically about wedding photography and wedding videos, is that I have hit crossroads at different points where I've asked myself, is this a branch of my work that I want to keep doing? Because I don't want to just do something because that's what I've always done, or that's the foundation I've built my business off of. And what ends up happening is that, let's say on the calendar now I have 5 or 10 weddings. So if at any point I decided I was going to stop, I still have to finish those 5 or 10, right? And so even if in my head one day I say, oh, you know what, like, I think it's kind of time, maybe I shouldn't do weddings anymore. In like the next wedding and the one after that, I realize how much of my interests are actually on that day, like experiencing, being able to take that artistic vision of being curious and appreciating the value people bring and appreciating what's below the surface, and then doing that work for that couple or those, even if it were a business. Like I think that's the thread that I'm realizing, is just kind of going through all these different branches of my work. And even you are actually in one of my photographs that I think about when these kind of decisions come about, because your friends Hip and Trammy, you surprised them with a lion dance at their reception, and they were so shocked and so excited. And I have a photo of the 3 of you and just the excitement that is in that moment. And that photo is actually emblematic of all of this stuff, all what is wrapped up in all my interests and passions. And another side note about that image is that this lovely couple, Hip and Trammy, at the end of the night, they realized that Hip's boutonniere was broken. It had like the flower itself was no longer there. It was just the pin with the base. And so they told me that what happened when they were looking at their wedding photos that I delivered to them, and they saw this photo that I'm talking about where the performers had just come out and you guys are so excited, the flower is in midair falling. Like that is the moment in which the boutonniere broke. And so that just speaks to like the sketching process, where I'm always like, what is interesting, what's happening? Yeah. And I'm always taking pictures, and it creates those experiences where I captured such a unique and in some ways like a mundane moment, a boutonniere broke, like whatever, but that happened at that exact same time with the excitement of that celebration. And so as you can see, like I just like wrap all this stuff together. And as somebody who feels like I am kind of a slow learner and like, I don't pick up on things fast enough, like I am excited to keep bringing this way of working for decades and decades to come, and just see like what happens then. Like when I know, my camera's better, and when I know lighting better, and when I understand like a dynamic better, that like it's only going to be more interesting. So I just don't see like, this podcast will now be a document of this statement, I guess, but I don't see a time that like really, truly, I would say like, oh, I've moved on from weddings because they're just weddings. Like, because to me, it's like, it still has everything I love about creativity and telling a story and documenting a moment. So yeah, that's kind of my like wedding journey. And like, well,
I'm very glad I could be an integral part of your journey.
You are.
Little did I know that when we decided to do this interview. But speaking to that, though, I think you also create like one of their favorite photos and their favorite moments, and being able to give that gift to someone is pretty incredible. I mean, a different type of fulfillment than helping, a third world country, after a devastating earthquake. But I mean, there's still something very fulfilling about that a lot of people can't say they've had, And in addition, you meet people, right? So like here we are having a podcast however many years later after, I briefly met you at this wedding, and it's kind of interesting the way it all kind of webs through and gets connected. But, speaking to, all of the issues that we've kind of touched on with human trafficking and third world countries and all the challenges that they've had, I think it's just really important that we continue to have documentarians. And I think what's really fascinating is that, there's so many trends with films, right? Like, oh, we're in the superhero age right now, whatever. But I feel like documentaries have always kind of been like, it's there. It's like the dictionary on the bookshelf. Like you always kind of have to have documentaries because these stories always have to be told. And I have this rule, my husband and I, we watch films, and we won't watch a film if like the combination of like critics and audience, all these things have a certain percentage, because we just don't have enough time, right? So, but documentaries are always like 99%, like they're always like in the top percentage. And I feel like it's because people can really appreciate the truth to things and that they're being shown truth. And, even what you're talking about with the women with their menstruation, like the fact that Period, End of Sentence just won an Oscar for bringing light to these same types of issues is pretty awesome. Like things that people need to kind of have, attention brought to. So I'm glad that you're continuing to do documentaries, because I'm not doing any more of them. Everyone always asks me, and I get it, because on one hand, I have that same kind of feeling as you do, where you really want to tell a story, you want people to know something, and so there's like the desire. But on the technical standpoint, like my one documentary almost killed me, so I am glad that you're continuing on that journey, and you've done quite a few, and I know that one of them won awards. And what are you working on now in terms of documentaries, or what's kind of in your mindset for the next story to be told?
Yeah. Oh man, that's a big question. I feel like I have 1,000 ideas, and sometimes it's just about like which one is going to get the momentum it needs to get to the next step. Maybe I'm going to answer that question, but I just am really struck by how you framed that relationship with your documentary, because I think that the journey is so much longer and harder than it seems from the beginning. Like, yeah. And even if you say like, oh, I know it's going to take a while, it actually takes so much longer. And my friend said she's been meaning to make a t-shirt, and I'll be the first one to buy it. And the t-shirt is going to say, yes, I'm still working on my documentary. Because she just feels like amongst her filmmaker friends that's just like the constant line that keeps coming out.
Or like the ones working on their novels. It's like the writers feel the same way about their one novel, right? Yeah, it's the one documentary. Yes. We're all working on it. Yes.
Yes, I'm still working on my passion project, fill in the blank of what that is. But I mean, don't you think that, I don't know if you had the same experience with working on your film, but even just finishing it is a lot of work. Like even once you feel like it's 98% finished, it feels like that last 2% like still takes as long as the first 98%.
Oh, it's horrible.
Like I don't know.
It's horrible. Not only is it horrible, but it's never finished, which is like I always say, these artists, right, what I imagine they go through, because I maybe can draw a stick figure. I don't know. I'm not quite sure I'm there yet. But like I think about artists and I say, well, here's my analogy. It's like, well, this is what you've made at this point in your life. And at some point you have to just stop, right? And say, okay, this project is over. That's it. Because if I watch my documentary today, I'm like horrified. I'm like, oh my gosh, I should have had this in it. I should have done this. I should have taken this out. I'm like, well, you know what? That was a story I told in 2012. That is the resources I had. And that is where I was at in my filmmaking capacity. And like, otherwise I'd still be making it. It's 2019. I could still be working on it. So at some point you do have to say like, I'm done. So that 2% is horrible because it really isn't 2% from an artist standpoint. I imagine you're probably having even more so because you look at things like the lighting and, I didn't care as much about lighting. I had someone come in and help with color correction a little bit. Like from that standpoint, it probably is even worse because you have the creative and the technical side fighting. And so, yeah, the last 2% is for sure absolutely horrendous. And then don't even talk about then what? You have a finished product. Who's going to watch it? How do you get people to watch it? Then you go down the film festival thing. I've had some film festival directors on my show and, had them kind of talk about the quote unquote secrets, but really it's kind of a crapshoot. I mean, there's like thousands of films that are amazing that will just never get into film festivals. It's like a whole different animal, which I didn't really understand when I made my film because it was my first film. And I thought getting into 10 festivals and actually winning something at each was kind of normal. And I was upset when I still didn't get into more. And I was just more upset about I couldn't revel in the enjoyment of the good things. I was only like, well, I didn't get into this or this or this. So I didn't really understand it until like I spoke to more indie filmmakers and there was like some empathy, but yes, it's kind of a process. And I think if someone's doing it as their part-time kind of thing, it could be really frustrating. So I think they have to go in with a certain mindset, but I'm more of a checkbox, like things to be done right away. And so it was very challenging for me.
Oh man. Yeah. You hit on so much. And I agree. It is the film festival process, having been through it a few times. I actually think for my next projects so film festivals don't necessarily like it when your film is online and accessible to people because
right.
They want it to be a bit more precious.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
Like, oh, come to the film festival. But I'm going to kind of experiment with different kind of perceptions of that because some film festivals don't care.
Yeah.
And so if you say, I'm going to kind of set aside these film festivals that do care, and I'm going to say that my point is getting people to watch the film. So I'm going to open it up to people seeing it online. But I also want to go to a film festival because that's where really interesting conversations happen. That's where it kind of exists in a collective world of people who care about this type of thing. And it's really beautiful, the type of friendships and collaborations that can come out of it. So that's kind of my perception. I will, TBD to see if it works or not. But I
well,
think
it's changing though, right? It's totally changing. So back, I would say 10 years ago, almost like 10 years now, like, you definitely couldn't have it accessible. You couldn't even, if I had sold DVDs at my thing, which don't even exist now, right? Like, I think every person in that theater would have bought one right then and there, but I was like, oh, I have to wait for distribution and blah, 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 blah. And it's changed so much and it depends on the goal, right? So if you've got a social justice film that you just like want the message out there, then just put it out there, let everybody, the more people to see it, the better, but I can understand from a filmmaker's perspective if they are trying to market something, from more an artistic standpoint and having that theatrical release. I mean, it is a special thing. So, but it's changed so much. I wouldn't even know where to begin now, to be honest. So I can't wait to hear how that goes for you. Let me know.
Yeah. We'll see what happens. But I was also wondering too, because I think you could speak to, what does the film do beyond kind of some of those practical kind of business? Because ultimately that still is kind of business.
Of course.
But how has, I can't help but turn this back on you because I have so many questions for you too. But what do you think the existence of that film has like changed for you in your own experience, but also in your relationship with your father? Like the fact that it exists is like, it's probably like doing stuff in your life, right?
Yeah. I mean, obviously I made it with a very specific purpose in mind, like this was obviously in honor of my father. Some of my quote unquote movie critics would be like, oh, this is a love letter to her father. Obviously this is, a very dutiful daughter, blah, 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 very Asian American of me. Right. But, and I think every daughter or son could probably tell a very touching story about their parent. Like, I think every person has an incredible story to be told, but my father happens to be a little extra special, I will say. I know everyone thinks their parents are special, but my dad's, kind of got a whole nother thing going on with him and what he's done with Chinese Kung Fu and the impression he's even made on the United States and China and, worldwide. We went to a tournament in China recently, and we don't go all the time. We haven't been back actually since the early 2000s to those tournaments over in China. It's just been crazy. We just take the cultural trips, but the tournaments themselves are very hectic. And we met a lot of people from other countries, South America and Africa specifically. They go to China tournaments a lot. I don't know if that's like a well-known fact, but it's something I didn't realize. So, and we met a lot of Kung Fu teachers. And they asked us our name, or they asked who, someone was taking a picture with my father, and they're like, oh, who is that? I'm like, oh, that's Grandmaster Pui Chan. And they like practically fainted. And I'm like, yeah, that's my father. And he goes, oh, well, then you're Mimi Chan. I'm like, I am Mimi Chan. And so they had already known of us, but because we haven't been around, they didn't recognize us like visually, but like my father's name is so world renowned, right? So for me, I felt like it was a responsibility to document his journey and his contribution. And also I wanted to document it, right? So I wanted the story to be told from my point of view, which for me is the most factual, which for me is, I'm the one in contact with him, because a lot of people have wanted to tell his story. And I kind of just think I wanted to beat everybody to the punch, but also I had to do it my way, which is also why I decided to do everything myself, from editing to all of it. And that's why it was so painful. But so for me, yes, my father, obviously, he loved it. He loved the film festival thing. He loved because, when we won the first award, he jumped up on stage literally and was like, I've never won a movie award before, and technically it was my award because I was the director, but it was not. It was his reward, which it's true. It was for him, and he's the subject of it. So he absolutely loves the film. And for me, I just feel very proud that I've been able to document something in its truth. And that also was recognized, for not just being a good story, which is all on him. It's not my story. It's not like I made this creative story. I was just retelling, right? But that it was recognized for being quality standalone film. Like it was recognized on that regard. So that was very satisfying for me. But I'm a very on to the next thing, like, okay, check, now I need to get this or this or this. And so I'm kind of never satisfied in that way. I'm just always going forward. And but in terms of having it there, it's awesome, because even as we run our Wallam Kung Fu system, any new student comes in, we're like, watch a documentary, because then you'll know what you're getting into, you'll understand the history of it, and it enriches them so much more. Like they're so much more connected to what they're about to, endeavor on. And so that's been very important for us. So that's why I feel documentary work is really relevant and important, whatever the subject may be, for some faction or some group or some organization, it's very important that it exists, because there are people that will watch it and have a need to watch it. So that's why I'm excited to see which one you're going to be doing next, because you have a tendency towards really important subject matter. You have a really great way of seeing things through the lens that you do. You capture things, and I can tell just from your photos. I'm not as familiar with your film work, but through your photos, I can already tell like you have a vision. And so definitely sit down to do it. Definitely sit down to get it together and finalize, because it's definitely worthwhile in the end.
Yeah, and I think that you touched on what I love about being a viewer of documentaries, as well as then what motivates me is change, that it does something. Because even in comedy, like a joke can change your perception of one object. Like I love Mitch Hedberg, and he had just a one-liner that said, my friend asked me if I wanted a frozen banana. I said no, but then I thought maybe I want a regular banana later, so yeah. And that changes my whole perception of frozen bananas. Like I just think that frozen bananas are funny. Before that, I heard that I didn't care about frozen bananas. But more and more documentaries just have a way of, by creating it, number one, but by being a viewer, it can change your entire perception of either yourself or the world. And so that change is ultimately, I think, what motivates me. And I know that for some of the films that I've watched, like I mean, some outdoor films like Meru about these three climbers that like did what seems like an impossible climb. Like that's, really amazing. But then things like The Act of Killing and The Look of Silence that were about Indonesia back in the 60s and the killing that went on there. That was the way that filmmaker approached that content was so powerful. Or even just the recent Michael Jackson documentary, which was essentially just interviews. I mean, there were archival photos and some archival footage, but the core of 4 hours of filmmaking was hearing people's voices. And just that experience influenced me so intensely. And as I continue to have choice in the way my creativity, kind of where it goes and what I end up doing, like that is definitely a river that I want to be on, of people who do things that will help, shed light on things, kind of ask questions that I feel like need to be asked. And it is a heavy burden, and I do go through all the artistic roller coaster of sitting in my room or my studio and like saying, oh, I'm not good enough, I shouldn't do this anymore, I should give up. So I mean, I do experience that, but then being in it, as long as I'm moving, like that's the best place for me to be. Like when I stop is when those kind of questions feel more overwhelming. But because of the experiences I've had, and I will say even for your documentary that having put so much into one, it has a certain feeling, but when you do it multiple times, then you do kind of learn how to relate to them a little bit differently. But I think it's totally fine if you're saying like my motivation is not there to do that documentary. Like no word, like I don't.
No, I say never, but this is like me never hosting a international tournament thing here again. But the thing is, I feel I would never do it the same way. Meaning, I would hire an editor, and I would want like to have an actual like crew.
Yeah, let's collaborate.
That's fine. We can do that. We can absolutely do that. Because I feel like that one was so personal. Like I would have just ended up having to be like, okay, move, let me do it anyway. Because it's just, especially with Kung Fu and movement and knowing the right shots and all these type of things, right? So I felt like it was so specific. But I have learned since then of letting go of some of that control and being able to say no, like let other people kind of help me do my work, because that will make me more efficient in other things. So, and I think the same would apply to documentary filmmaking. Like I definitely have still a passion for it, which is why, my husband and I, we just released a very silly music video, you know what I mean, for his fitness. And it's called the 10 Fit Commandments. And so we're still doing little things here and there, and that might sustain me for a while, but it's probably not a never that I'll never want to do another film. I just don't want to do it the same way.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think it's cool when you collaborate and at the end of the process, you can see everybody's fingerprints on it, that hasn't been any compromise in terms of your vision or someone else's skills and let's say like director, cinematographer, like if it's a good collaboration, both people get to feel like this is my best work, and then the end product is that much better. And so I've definitely learned over the years that collaboration, it has to be the right relationship. Like it's not just yes. collaboration for the sake of collaboration, but if you're in tune with yourself and able to find that team that you can work with, then it's better. I like the fact that I can look back at some of my projects and say I'm proud of it, that I made it, but I know it would not have been the same if it was just me, mm-hmm. I think that can be a kind of trap that some of us creatives fall in, is that we put too much pressure on this vision at the end that we get to take credit for everything, and ultimately what can take something to the next level is usually the kind of cross-pollination and momentum that comes from conversation. Because even like great artists and authors. They were all friends.
Yes,
like,
yeah,
I mean,
there's a
the
lot of
Impressionists were
collaboration.
friends.
Yeah.
Like, you know, and so it's just kind of like recognizing that we need those voices and influences in each other's lives to push us to the next level.
Yeah, and I think when you had mentioned earlier about like the joy, the joyful part of film festivals is that you are meeting people and that everybody there has empathy because they all know what we're going through. You know, it's a very different animal to talk to someone who has had to actually finish, you know, a film or a project or go through that. It's like a different experience. You know, it's like and we can empathize with one another, which is always really good. So, all right, a few final questions for you. I am very curious, being that you said you were the son of a pastor, and how your family or your father, so to speak, took to you kind of changing your worldview in terms of religion. How did that affect you and your journey?
Well, I think at first, I mean, there was definitely my internal process of even having to come to terms myself with something, like such a big break in terms of a worldview, the only worldview I had ever known up through kind of my 20s. Like, I think mid to late 20s was when I was really able to begin to step back and hear myself, even what I talked about in terms of Nepal, and hearing the evangelical lens say one thing, not feeling it resonate, but not knowing what to do with that. Like, that was like early 20s, but I didn't have language for myself on how to deal with it. So I think because I went through the journey, I mean, there was very much a coming out of the closet type experience, because it did lead to difficult conversations. And I think in particular, it was difficult with my father because of his occupation and his rooted, you know, how rooted he is in the worldview. It's not like he can casually say like, oh, you know, that's okay, go do your own thing, because the evangelical worldview is like right and wrong. Like, you are either in or you're out. Mm-hmm. And so I think even to this day, like, I would imagine that it is still difficult for him to see me on the outside. I don't think it influences his love for me in any way, but I imagine that there is like a tear in his perception of me and in his hope for me. And I think that's also, I think one of the tragedies about the in and out worldview, right and wrong, black and white, is that if you aren't together, then you're apart. And I just don't think that that duality is necessary, for the sake of, like, we all have these complexities and we all have overlap in terms of what we think about life and love and, you know, death. And I mean, there are big questions. Like, I call myself, at one point, in not, labels sometimes are really great, because you could just be like, I'm a Christian, and like, then that just is like
everybody knows,
clear, right? And so as soon as I kind of took that label off, I was like, oh, what am I? And so for a while now, I've called myself a pragmatic humanist with a deep respect for mystery, and the emphasis on the mystery part. Like, it's, I mean, there's so much that we don't know, and that's what I want to like find that connectedness around. So even though my dad may feel like, you know, I'm not in, and there may be like a tragic bent to it, I like kind of bask in the mystery that surrounds all of it. And you know, I appreciate the fact that my parents are the type of people that you know, really do like love well. And so I wasn't concerned about losing that love, but when I got to the point where it's like, oh, this is how I feel, there is a line and I need to share that with people, like, it was very difficult. Mm-hmm. And I mean, yeah, it's you know, still resonates in my family and in my circles. So
yeah, of course.
Even some people may listen to this and then they are going to be hearing for the first time, like, oh wait, like, John's not a Christian, like, because, you know, I haven't talked to everybody. But
right,
anyways,
right. Yeah, I mean, and like you said, it shouldn't just be like in or out. Like, I have love for everybody and respect for everybody who has whatever beliefs that they want to believe. But it's kind of like when people are telling you what to believe is the issue, right? So, but I think, like you said, it should just kind of be open. You know, you're not literally on one side of the fence or the other. But then the rules that are created within these religions is what kind of makes that in and out. Like it's a very, it's a very drawn line in the sand, and that's the hard part. But hopefully that will evolve and change over time. It's a whole nother conversation.
For sure. Yeah. So many conversations.
Which I'm not qualified to have in any way. So, but I definitely can't wait to hear about what other projects you're coming up with. And I would love for my listeners, not just to listen to you, but also to see your work. So I will tag all of your stuff here so they can see what you're up to and look at your beautiful photos and videos, because you definitely are very talented in that regard, and what your vision is. And I can't wait to see what the next project is, even though you haven't committed yet. And I didn't get you to commit on the podcast, but that's okay.
No commitment yet. No commitment. But stay tuned.
Right. To be heard. So we'll definitely keep posted on that. But thank you so much for your time today. It was awesome to talk to you on Culture Chat, and I loved hearing about all of the work that you're doing, and looking forward to the work you will be doing.
Well, and I appreciate you just creating the podcast as this platform for so many voices. Like when I look down at all of your episodes, I see such diversity. And I think that, because I get this as well. Like it's already come up in this conversation where it's like, you should focus on one thing and excel on one thing, right? But like, I think maybe you and I will probably continue to just pursue what makes us curious, what crosses our paths. And so like I said, I appreciate you doing all of the work so that this platform exists, because I really appreciate having a chance to talk to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to Culture Chat, and hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please subscribe and rate my podcast. Feel free to leave me suggestions or send an email to mimi@culturechatpodcast.com, or follow me on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook.